Have you ever been watching a game and been so invested in one team that you almost can't watch the game? Have you ever sat there watching your team pull ahead and thought that maybe this time, things would be different? That this time victory would finally be theirs and by extension yours? Have you ever sat there and watched as the victory that seems so sure a moment ago began to slip away? Have you ever watched as your team went from leading to tied to trailing, and all you can think is, this is not how this is supposed to go? And that sick feeling in your stomach that this is going to be bad starts to build and build until all you can think about is how much you don't want to watch this, but yet you just can't turn away. Have you ever held out hope, even a fool's hope, that your team would turn it around, that they would do the miraculous? Have you ever counted point differentials while you begged the clock to slow down because just maybe your team could snatch victory from the jaws of defeat? Have you ever sat there when your team lost and felt utterly hopeless? Have you ever looked at the zeros on the clock and the deficit on the scoreboard and felt like you've been punched in the gut because no matter what else happens, you were wrong to hope, wrong to dream, wrong to look for victory? Have you ever felt the pain of losing when you thought for sure that this time you were going to win? If so, then take that feeling and multiply it by 1,000 and stand next to John at the foot of the cross. Stand there and watch as the one that you were sure would save the world is arrested. Stand there and watch as the one who you were sure would lead the people of Israel to freedom is nailed to a cross. Stand there with John and hope for something beyond possible. Hope for the miracle that maybe, just maybe, he would listen to the mockers and save himself as he saved others. Stand there and listen to his ragged breath as you hold out hope that somehow he will survive this and lead his people to victory and freedom. Stand there and watch the blood collect in pools around the cross and count the time that he has left before the end. Take that feeling of loss, that feeling like nothing is ever going to be right again, and multiply it by like 1,000,000 as you stand here and watch Jesus, the one you called Messiah, the one who healed the sick and raised the dead and entered the city to shouts of Hosanna, dies right before your eyes. Stand there and hold out hope that maybe he isn't really dead until you see his side pierced and the blood and water pour from the wound. Stand there and try to figure out how you could have gotten this all so very, very wrong. When we look at this day through the lens of the resurrection, we can call it good. And we can rejoice that the Savior has come and has chosen to die for us. We can meet here on Good Friday and smile because we know what this cross means. We know that Sunday's coming. But we must not move too quickly past the cross. We must not look past the pain in order to see the victory. We must not ignore the violence in order to see the empty tomb. Let us linger for a while on the pain, on the feelings of failure, on that deep pain that comes from losing, from choosing the wrong side, that pain that comes from being sure that God is going to come through for you and then discovering that he doesn't. Good Friday reminds us that we live in a world of pain. There's hope because we know that Sunday's coming, but there's pain and loss and regret and tears. That's where we live, and that's what this world is. We don't want to move too quickly past this day because it's this day, this horrible, horrible day, that allows us to say with confidence that this world's not our home. It's this day that allows us to say that even though it looks like we're defeated, we know that God has won. It's this day that we can call good, because on this day, the God of the universe sent his Son to die on a cross to pay a debt that we could never pay. on this day, Jesus Christ took on himself the penalty for our sins, and we can rejoice and call this day good. So come, look, remember, and open up your heart as we worship together.
My name? You can call me Simon. Doesn't matter. You look like a traveler. Were you at Golgotha today? I was. Not because I was planning to, but I was. Planned. What a joke. This wasn't what I had planned. This isn't what I was expecting. I thought I had everything figured out. Well, I knew I wasn't ever going to have him figured out. You know who I'm talking about. Healer, rabbi, the rebel. But he was so much more than that to me. See, I was one of the first to go with him. I was there to meet him on the ground floor. I laughed with him. I sat with him. I fished with him. I would listen to him speak to me about his Father. I was the first one to really recognize who he was. I was the one who had the bravery to say it. I was the one who said what everyone was thinking, but no one would actually speak it. I remember he said, "Just who do you think I am?" And he had that look in his eye, that look of curiosity. You know, the best way I guess I could describe it is he had that look like my wife would have when I would walk in and she had made my favorite meal. That look of anticipation, that look of excitement, of wanting to see my reaction when I walk in and smell the lamb with all the spices. He had this look of attentive curiosity. He wanted to see our reaction when we finally realized the truth. And I did. I was the first one to say it. I was the first one to say, "You are Messiah. You are the anointed one. You are the one who is here to deliver us from this mess that is our lives." And then he called me a rock. Of course, Andrew said he probably meant I was dumb as a rock. But I know what he meant. I was going to be a general in his army. I was going to be his right-hand man. And ever since then, I was looking for my moment to prove my worth to him. Last night, I thought it was that moment. When the priests and the soldiers came in to arrest him, I sprung up and I drew my sword and I lunged at them. Because that's what a good right-hand man's supposed to do. But Jesus said no. He told me to put my sword away, and he even healed the man I wounded. I didn't get it. They took him, they tried him, they beat him, they crucified him. He told me I would betray him. I didn't believe him. In fact, I called him crazy. I said, "No, I would die for you." But sure enough, I fled from the soldiers. Heck, I even fled from the little servant girl who said she recognized me. Some general afraid of a little girl. But he was my friend. How could I do that to him? So I went back. I threw my cloak on, threw my hood up. I stood in the middle of the crowds. I didn't want anybody to see me. In fact, I couldn't even look up to meet his eyes. But I could hear, through the crowds and through the murmuring, I could hear his voice. It was weak. It was anguished. It was in pain, but I heard him. And of all the miracles I saw him perform, and of all the things I heard him say, this beats them all. I heard him say, "Father, Forgive them, for they know not what they do. He forgave them. And it was in that moment, in the shadow of my betrayal, that I realized that I was one of them. He forgave me. But I can't accept that. Can I?
It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him,
"Lord, are you going to wash my feet?"
Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand."
"No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet."
Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me."
Then Lord, Simon Peter replied, "Not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well."
Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him. And that was why he said, not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." Will you stand and sing with me? Up Calvary's mountain, one dreadful morn, walked Christ my Savior, weary and worn. Savior and friend, how can my praises ever find end? Through years unnumbered, on heaven's shore, my song shall praise you forevermore. Blessed Redeemer, precious Redeemer, seems thou art seeing on Calvary's tree, wounded and bleeding, for sinners pleading, blinded and unheeding, dying for dying for me. Blessed Redeemer, precious Redeemer, seems thou art singing on Calvary's tree, wounded and bleeding, for sinners pleading, blinded and unheeding, dying for dying for me. Church, you may be seated.
He's gone. My son, gone, executed. He has a name, you know. Not that anyone in that blood-hungry crowd cared, but his name is Dismas. I named him after my father. He was a good man. He died when Dismas was just a toddler, but right after the baby was born, my father came to visit. He was so proud to be his namesake. He sat me down and he said, "Tabitha, here's what I want you to remember. He's a boy. Take him to synagogue. Teach him the ways of our people. Most important, daughter, teach him of God, of justice and mercy and humility." And I did. He was quite a good student, you know. He learned the books of the law by heart. He was a good boy, always looking out for the underdog. He never could stand to see someone being bullied. More than once, the rabbi came by to talk to his father and me about how Dismas had shoved down a bigger boy or hit someone for picking on the smaller boys. I told him more than once that he had to learn to control his temper. He always said the same thing. "Remember, Mama, Proverbs says, speak up for the people who have no voice, for the rights of all the down and outers." It was hard to argue with that, though I scolded him for his methods. As he got older, those methods got more extreme. These last few years, as the Romans have tightened their grip on our region, Dismas became more of a rebel. He let his anger get the best of him. I saw him less and less. He turned from the compassionate and kind person that he was into violence and retribution. Last week, it caught up with him. The neighbor boy came running to tell me that Dismas had been arrested and was going on trial. I hurried to the prefect's court and arrived just in time to hear the verdict. Guilty of treason against the Roman government. I hadn't seen Dismas in months, but I threw myself in front of him and I turned to face Pilate. I pleaded for him to have mercy. I tried to explain his motives. It did no good. He was sentenced to be crucified. This morning at Golgotha, my son carried his cross past me. Through tears, I told him I loved him. He told me he loved me too. And then he said, "Remember, Mama, speak for the voiceless." And then the soldiers shoved me aside and they led him to the top of the hill. I turned away as they carried out his sentence, but I couldn't leave. After a while, I looked at the scene on the hilltop. The man in the middle had been beaten badly, and the man on the other side of him was yelling vile insults. My son, my Demas. Even as he hung there in agony, he spoke up and he said, "Can't you see? This man is innocent." My compassionate boy, denied mercy himself, he still found the strength to call for mercy for another. And then he spoke to the man in the middle cross. "Remember me when you come into your kingdom?" The man in the middle, bloody, bruised, struggling for every breath, turned his face towards my son. And with great effort, he spoke, "Today, you will be with me in paradise." I don't know much about that man in the middle, but it seems Dismas might have. I've heard his name. I want to believe him. I want to believe he has the power to deliver my son into paradise, and maybe he can deliver me there as well. No, I don't want to believe. I do believe. Savior, remember me.
On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked,
Where do you want us to make preparations for you to eat the Passover?
He replied, "Go into the city to a certain man and tell him, 'The teacher says, my appointed time is near. I am going to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house.' So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them and prepared the Passover. When evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12. And while they were eating, he said, 'Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me.'"
Surely you don't mean me, Lord.
Jesus replied, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." Then Judas, the one who would betray him, said,
Surely you don't mean me, Rabbi.
Jesus answered, "You have said so." While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Will you stand and sing with me? I
They say particular senses are linked really closely with memory. I guess that's true. The smell of burned bread definitely brings back strong memories of my mother's cooking. But I think the one that does it for me is the sense of touch. Just thinking about a certain texture can take me back to a moment. Like the rough lines of a fishing net sliding through my hands. No matter how old I get or how far from the lake I am, I'll never forget how it feels to tie a knot or to mend a hole in a torn net. You can lose a lot of good fish if you're not careful. And when that's your livelihood, you learn to mend those holes quickly and carefully. That's what I was doing that day when we first heard his voice. I was tying knots, and my brother was gathering it up as I did, so it didn't get tangled. Not fun, but necessary. We'd been out to hear the wilderness preacher a few times. He was captivating. Wild hair, strange garments, and he had told us to watch for the Messiah, that he was close. He told us to be watching, so I was. I listened to all the rumors about conquerors and potential rulers and those who claimed to be the deliverer. But I just couldn't figure out who it was supposed to be and what I was supposed to do about it, even if I figured it out. And then it happened. That day, when I was just sitting there with my brother on our boat, anchored just offshore, working hard fixing the nets, came a voice from the shore. "Follow me." I can't explain to you how those words hit me. I didn't just hear them, I felt them. I looked at the man on the shore, and he looked back. Again, he said, "Follow me." It wasn't harsh, it wasn't a command, but it was an invitation, an exclamation, an opportunity. And I didn't know it then, but those words, they were a promise. I let the net fall, and I followed him. The last 3 years have gone by quickly, and right now, much of it is a blur. But I remember how some things felt. I remember stooping down and feeling what was left of the mud he made with saliva and dirt, while he stepped forward and spread it on that blind man's eyes. It just felt like regular mud, but using it, he made that man see it. I remember reaching in and picking up the last piece of bread, feeling the bottom of the basket with my fingers, only to reach in a moment later and find that there was still more. I remember the hungry hands of people grasping for bread that only moments ago hadn't even existed. I remember picking up a shard of a broken jar, which seconds earlier had held valuable perfume. I remember tracing my thumb over the sharp edge while he spoke gently to the young woman who had poured that perfume out. I remember the feeling of my shoulder resting against him as the 13 of us reclined around the table that night. I remember reaching out for him too late, feeling his cloak pulled from my fingers as the soldiers led him away. I remember. What will I remember of him today? I will remember the feeling of his mother's head resting on my shoulder. I will remember the warmth of her quiet tears soaking through my cloak. I will remember how she trembled as he spoke to us both. He hung there in agony. And then came that same voice that called me to follow, not as strong, but just as clear. First to his mother and then to me. "Woman, behold your son, behold your mother." In his last moments, from within that dark shadow of aloneness, he reminded us that we are not meant to be alone. He reminded us of our need for each other. We are meant to be woven together, much like a net, depending on the strength of another, mending the broken places, working together for his purpose. I will remember.
Then Jesus told them, "This very night you will all fall away on account of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter replied,
Even if all fall away on account of you, I will.
"Truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared,
Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you.
and all the other disciples said the same. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he returned to the disciples and found them sleeping. "Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it's not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." When he came back, he again found them sleeping, because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the 3rd time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them: "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said,
Greetings, Rabbi, and kiss him.
Jesus replied, "Do what you came for, friend." Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. "Put your sword back in its place," Jesus said to him, "for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way?" In that hour, Jesus said to the crowd, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. But this has all taken place so that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples deserted him and fled.
Take the highest
watered, and some of my mother's stew, but I couldn't even figure things out well enough to form the words. But that man, the one I'd never seen before then, he sent my little sister to get me something to eat. And, second miracle of the day, she did just as she was told without arguing. That was over a year and a half ago, but when I saw him today, it all came flooding back. My father didn't want me here today, and my father is a man who is used to getting his way. In our family shop, he rules the roost. At the synagogue, people do what he says without question. But at our house, between my little sister and my mom and me, he's outnumbered. He's good-natured about it. He grumbles about never having any quiet, about the house being overrun by ribbons and perfume and pretty fabrics. But I know deep down he loves being able to provide those things for us. When the fever struck me, year before last, he sat by my bedside for 4 days, swabbing my forehead with cool, wet cloths. He sent my sister to fetch the physician, but he said there was nothing he could do for me. By the third evening, I was so weak I couldn't open my eyes, and I couldn't speak. But my father sat there, mopping the sweat, singing songs and whispering, "Be strong, my sweetness, be strong." But I couldn't be. There was no strength left. The sickness was too much. I was burning up from the inside out. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see. I couldn't speak. And then I died. Funny, huh? Nobody should be able to say that. I shouldn't be able to say that I remember dying, but I do. It was like being in a deep pit that collapsed in on me. Pressure, heat, darkness, and then nothing. But then, this is confusing. Then I felt somebody pick up my hand. I could feel the warmth of that other hand, but I knew my hand was lifeless and cold. And somewhere in my dead mind, I knew I shouldn't be feeling anything, and I shouldn't be thinking about feeling anything. That tiny spark in the darkness, that moment of awareness that just shouldn't have even been, it was the most unimaginable thing I could ever have felt. Then I heard him. At first it was like hearing somebody from the next room, a voice muffled by distance. But he spoke again and said, "Talitha kum," little girl, get up. I was annoyed for a second. From the time I was 9, I started hating being called little girl, and then I was almost 13. But the annoyance was burned away as that spark of awareness blazed into a flame, and then into an inferno, and then my eyes opened, and before I knew it, I was sitting up, and then standing up, and then, before I could make any sense of things, my parents were wrapping their arms around me. My mother was praying and thanking Yahweh, and my father was just repeating, my sweetness, over and over again. That's when the man I'd never seen sent my sister to get me a meal. Nothing had ever tasted better, and nothing has since. From that moment, my father kept me by his side whenever possible. He even took me to go hear the teacher speak on the hillside not long after the day I died. I saw people arriving at the hillside that day. Not to brag, but I think I'm one of the few experts on what it's like to be dead. And I can tell you, some of those people were just as dead as I had been in every way, except physically. And I saw some of those same people leaving after they heard him, after he fed them. And I saw that spark that I had felt too. It was in their eyes, in their conversations.
Not an inferno yet, maybe not even a flame, but the spark was there. It made me happy. Today, my father wanted me to stay home. He didn't think I would understand. But then I understand better than he does. I know the man who brought me back to life that day is good, holy, perfect. But a man that goes around setting fires like that, he makes people nervous too. He makes people nervous who've spent too many years keeping the flame under control, keeping it dim enough and cool enough that the darkness can skirt in pretty close. Those people finally got their way today. They crucified him. Today, standing by my father's side, I saw a nail sticking right through the hand that had pulled me out of the pit. He said, "I thirst." I wish I could have sent my sister for a cup of water. If anyone ever deserved it, it was this powerful, compassionate, miracle-working man. My father broke down and sobbed. You'd think I would too. After all, I know what it's like when that pit starts to crumble and the light starts to fade and you're overcome by the shadow of suffering. But I didn't weep. You want to know why? Because I know the fire spreads. And even when you think it's gone out, the embers can burst back into life. After all, I'm living proof.
Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. Peter followed him at a distance, right up to the courtyard of the high priest. He entered and sat down with the guards to see the outcome. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death, but they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, two came forward and declared,
This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days.
Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus,
Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?
But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him,
I charge you with an oath by the living God. Tell us that you are the Messiah, the Son of God.
You have said so, Jesus replied. But I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his clothes and said,
He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard blasphemy. What do you think?
He is worthy of death, they answered. Then they spit in his face and struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said,
Prophesy to us, Messiah. Who made thee?
Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him,
Are you the king of the Jews?
You have said so, Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him,
Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?
But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them,
Which one do you want me to release to you? Jesus Barabbas, or Jesus who is called the
for he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message.
Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him.
But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed.
Which of the two do you want me to release to you?
They answered,
What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?
Pilate asked. They all answered,
Crucify him.
Why? What crime has he committed? Asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder.
Crucify him.
When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. I am innocent of this man's blood, he said. It is your responsibility. All the people answered,
His blood is on us and on our children.
Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him.
Hail, King of the Jews.
They said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. You stand and sing with me. Savior, I come, quiet my soul. Remember, redemption's here, where your blood is spilled from my ransom. Everything I want and fear, I count it all as lost.
watched every moment. It is the hardest thing any mother could ever have to do. But if, through his swollen, blackened eyes, he looked down from that cross, darkened by the shadow of awful crucifixion, I wanted to make sure he saw the face of one person who loved him. And he did. I almost broke down. His eyes met mine, the eyes that looked up from me from that hay-filled manger, the eyes that brimmed with tears as I cleaned his skin elbow, the eyes that read the scrolls in the synagogue, the eyes that looked over Jerusalem and wept, the eyes that saw every need, every wound, every hurt, every sinful soul, and refused to look away. I knew long ago he was meant for a purpose. When you're visited by an angel, you start to understand that this baby you're carrying might be something more. When the shepherds came to kneel at his makeshift cradle, a mother suspects that her baby's life will not be an ordinary one. When a wise man brings gifts worth more money than the carpenter shop brings in a year, a mother should know that Yahweh has a plan bigger than she can wrap her mind around. When a mother finds her 12-year-old explaining the law and the prophets to the greatest teachers in Jerusalem, she can be fairly certain that there is something different in store for this boy. When your son looks in your face and says he has to be about his father's business, and something in your heart tells you that he doesn't mean carpentry, your heart skips a beat with the realization that this road will not be an easy one. When your son transforms plain water into the finest wine, when he restores sight, heals the lame, and even raises the dead, you know that this proves the divine intention behind his birth. These are the moments I've treasured in my heart. But a mother will worry, won't she? And I have. The more attention he drew to himself, the more the authorities threatened and whispered, the more I found myself wishing he would just come back to the carpenter shop and make a simple living. He's quite the good carpenter, you know. From the time Joseph taught him the skills, he worked hard to master them. I loved to watch him work, pounding, sawing, sanding, tables, chairs, bowls, ladles, and then, when each one matched the plan he'd sketched out on the parchment, he would wipe away the dust, step back, spread his arms, and smile, and say 3 simple words. 3 words that were a declaration of completion. I heard those words again today, and a mother knows, I knew, that they meant much the same thing, though infinitely magnified. No furniture, no housewares this time. But still, there was a plan, sketched out and in place since before my son was formed in my womb, and I suspect for much longer. Today on that cross, his arms spread, I'm almost positive that I saw on that bruised, wounded, blood-covered face, beyond belief, a smile. And I knew before he said them the words that came next. It is finished. But a mother knows things. It is finished, yes, without a doubt. But it isn't over.
As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. There they offered Jesus wine to drink, mixed with gall, but after tasting it, he refused to drink it. When they had crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots, and sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head, they placed the written charge against him. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. 2 rebels were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying,
You are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days. Save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God.
In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him.
He saved others to accept, but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross.
with him also heaped insults on him. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing there heard this, they said,
He's calling Elijah.
Immediately, one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said,
Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him.
And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. Will you stand and sing with me?
Oh
I'm not unfamiliar with death. I spent my life as a soldier in the service of the Empire. Early in my career, there were certainly long periods of time in which not one day passed that I did not see a fellow soldier or an enemy spill his lifeblood on the ground. And of course, for the past year, I've been the commander of detachment, charged with guarding prisoners and overseeing executions. I've seen the worst of humanity, both among those who die and those who come to watch. It was not an assignment I would have chosen, but when word comes down from on high, a soldier does not question his orders. But today I have questions. It was soldiers under my command who carried out Pilate's order to flog him. It was soldiers under my command who followed him through the streets to the place of the skull. It was soldiers under my command who tied the ropes and hammered the spikes that held him to the cross. And as my soldiers were busy carrying out their orders, it was I, Centurion Longinus, who, on the order of the authorities, nailed the sign above his head. "This is Jesus," it said, King of the Jews. I had heard of him, of course, heard tell of great wonders and wise teachings from those who followed him, of rebellion and treason from the authorities of the region. I've heard him called a troublemaker, the Messiah, a rabble-rouser, a healer, a criminal, and a savior. How could one know what to believe? But today, I've heard the last words of dozens, perhaps hundreds of men in my lifetime. I've heard them pleading for mercy, cursing those who sentenced them, even babbling nonsense. Today, I, obedient soldier Longinus, saw death like none I've ever witnessed. The sun had hidden itself for several hours by the time he died. The world felt strange, uneasy, draped in a shadow of death. And when he died, the uneasiness erupted into chaos. It rumbled and quaked, and we struggled to keep our footing. I will remember that, all of that, no doubt. But what I will remember even more are the words I heard him speak just before the moment of death. He turned his face to the sky and cried out, "Father, in your hands I commit my spirit." Why did he look to the heavens and call upon his Father? Just who was he talking to? It disturbs me. I've never seen someone die like that. No fear, just purpose and meaning. The world shook today. My world shook today. Jesus, King of the Jews. Soldiers are not trained for discussions of royalty, but surely this man was the Son of God. And I am left with one question. What now?
When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed,
"Surely he was the Son of God."
Many women were there, watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. As evening approached, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who had himself become a disciple of Jesus. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body, and Pilate ordered that it be given to him. Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and placed it in his own new tomb that he had cut out of the rock. He rolled a big stone in front of the entrance to the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting there opposite the tomb. The next day, the one after preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate.
"Sir," they said, "we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise again.'"
So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal the body and tell the people that he has been raised from the dead. This last deception will be worse than the first.
Take guard. Pilate answered, "Go, make
stone and posting the guard. It is finished. Turn cheer dismissed.